Well, welcome to our Family Ministries webinar focusing on fostering spiritual practices. I am just so thrilled to be with you, and what will follow after this introductory video is a series of videos from our Family Ministry team. Now, if you don't know what that is, our Family Ministries team is comprised of both our children's and student ministries as well as myself. And so we have some deep expertise and some real passion around seeing families and their young people grow up in the faith and be discipled in Jesus Christ. And so periodically we'll release resources like this, maybe at another time they'll be live, and we will send them out to you so that you can begin to disciple your kids in the home. We say it all the time. A parent, an adult in the home, someone who has influence over a young person, has the biggest spiritual role in their lives. We as a church are here to help, and we love coming alongside you as a family and helping disciple your kids. But the fact remains is you will always play the biggest role in shaping the faith of your kid. And so I want to introduce you to this concept of fostering spiritual practices in the home. And what I want to do first is just define some terms. What are we talking about when we talk about fostering spiritual practices? Well, I have 1,000 quotes that I could say about spiritual practices, but I'll only give a couple this morning. My doctoral advisor, a guy named J.P. Moreland, has written extensively about the spiritual practices, and my understanding of them have been deeply informed by him. So I want to leave you a quote right now. I want to give you a quote right now of his description of the spiritual disciplines. He writes this: "A Christian spiritual discipline is a repeated bodily practice done over and over again in dependence on the Holy Spirit and under the direction of Jesus and other wise teachers in His way to enable one to get good at certain things in life that one cannot learn by direct effort." Now, I love this quote. It is a mouthful, but I want to draw your attention to a couple key features. First is that it's a repeated practice. It's something that is meant to be done over and over again, not just once. As that being the case, what I love about the spiritual practices is that it gives you the chance to try them on for size, to experiment, and really to fail. So when you think about the Christian practices, this isn't something that you are ever intended to get right the first try. This is something that God has designed to be repeated over and over and over again. And what I also love about his definition is that you are not in this alone. You are dependent on both the Holy Spirit and the direction and leading of Jesus. These are things that when you undertake them, when you try them out in your homes, Christ will be there with you through the power of His Holy Spirit, pointing you in the right direction and making these things that might feel utterly common, and He, by gracing us with His presence, will make them uncommon and special. And lastly, you are meant to get better. What Moreland says at the very end, it says, they enable one to get good at certain things. You might be sitting here thinking like, hey, whenever I hear about spiritual practices or I think about things like that, I think about stuff like prayer and reading the Bible, stuff that I don't always feel comfortable doing or even good at. But the reality is that practice really does make perfect when it comes to the spiritual practices. As you get in the rhythm of trying them on for size day in and day out, or weekly, or however your family decides to participate in them, you will see some progress. Now, when we talk about the spiritual practices, sometimes we talk about this as the spiritual disciplines as well. And both those terms are right and true and good historical uses that the church has had. And when you use the word practice and discipline, sometimes they bring up this feeling of burden. And so I want to give you one more term that the church throughout history has used to describe these things that we'll talk about, these spiritual practices. And they are referred to as either means of grace or even one that I might like even more, means to grace. Again, one of my spiritual heroes, this is the last quote of this video, Dallas Willard, who is just a giant in the church. He actually trained my doctoral advisor when he did his doctorate. So I like to think I'm just 2 degrees removed from this spiritual giant. But he wrote this about the disciplines. He says, when you think about spiritual disciplines, they are activities we engage that are within our power and enable us to do what we cannot do by direct effort. Because in this way, we meet the action of God, His grace, with us. And the outcome is humanly inexplicable. This is what it means to speak of discipline as a means to grace. What I love about that is, of course, these spiritual practices will take time and energy and effort. They won't just happen. They will be things you'll need to put on your calendar or try to work into the rhythms of your life. And yet, God meets you in them so much that what might seem like a burden becomes a blessing. God's grace shows up when His people focus on what it is to become more and more like Jesus. So my hope for you is that you would give these spiritual practices a try. You know, it's been said anything worth doing is worth doing well. And that might be true, but that can be pretty intimidating. Maybe you are thinking about trying the spiritual practices, but get intimidated that you might do them poorly. Well, let me encourage you, because yes, anything worth doing is worth doing well. But I think that anything worth doing is also worth doing poorly. If you try out these spiritual practices and you end up failing on the first try, that's okay. They are so worth doing that they're worth getting started on, even if they flop and fail on your first few tries. You might gather the family around for the first family prayer and it ends in a fist fight. You might try to study the Bible together for the first time and you don't actually know what the scriptures are saying in this particular passage. These things, I think, are so worth doing that they're worth doing poorly. And so my encouragement to you is that you would give them a try, that you would experiment with them in your family, you would try to work them into the little nooks and crannies of time that you already have, and you might even be so bold to set aside some real time to get these worked in to the rhythm of your family life. And so again, anything worth doing is worth doing well, but it's also true that anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. So take advantage of the videos that the Family Ministry has put together for this Family Ministry webinar on fostering spiritual practices. We will be rooting you on in prayer from the sidelines, and we can't wait to hear how these practices make a difference in your lives.